Hey, welcome back to the channel. So making this quick video, currently working on a migration setup project for a client, and thought I'd record this because this is one of the most common services that I get questions about and work on when dealing with Housecall Pro, Jobber, and some of the smaller solutions out there, in addition to some marketing services. So for those new here, my name is Joe Guevara. I'm the founder of Free digital transformation and marketing agency that specializes in helping home and field service businesses become more efficient and drive growth through technology. So a lot of folks wonder about the difference between Housecall Pro and Jobber. If you've seen my other videos, I've kind of gone through a comprehensive review and comparison. I will be posting a new one this year on that as well, since data develop a lot. But if you compare these platforms and you look past just the features by themselves, one of the most important things to pay attention to in your specific situation and the details you have to figure out is what data you can keep and what data you will lose when starting to switch to a platform, getting it started. And that includes even if you're coming from a pen and paper process or an Excel sheet. So this client is actually somewhat unique because he's migrating from a Zoho CRM, which is a more custom and I would say typically higher end CRM. So we're now comparing Housecall Pro, Jobber, and some other solutions like Zuper. In this case, we're mapping them all out and actually comparing them directly through their free trials. You can take a look at those trials down below in the description if you want to try them out yourself. Generally speaking, most businesses will be migrating from an Excel sheet or from a QuickBooks export, as an example, which most use as a starter CRM for the most part, because you can do your invoicing there before upgrading to an actual field service management solution. In this case, my client decided to move away from the custom CRM, which is Zoho, primarily because of the big downsides that it's a lot more effort to manage. And it's usually not going to be as effective, even though you can customize it, compared to all-in-one solution. That being said, you do have to consider what I mentioned before, which is the data that you're actually going to be putting in, because even if you get all of the operational stuff handled when it comes to field service management features and functionality, if the data that you've been using and want to use isn't possible in the system, then it kind of falls apart after you start using it for a few months. So let's talk through what to expect. So in this case, this is going to be Housecall Pro. This is the simplest solution that we can kind of test out when we do a data migration. So I've already asked him to export out his list from Zoho, which interestingly, he had about 14,000 records in his Zoho CRM, and that's actual jobs. In this case, we had to migrate. So you'll probably end up, even if you're coming from, an Excel sheet or something like that, to something like this, where you have a bunch of different fields all across here. Obviously, Zoho is going to have a ton more data fields, which means that if you're migrating over from a more complex CRM to an all-in-one, you're going to lose a lot of data. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So when you're starting to look at Housecall Pro, the one thing that you're going to want to do is start to migrate. And when you start to migrate, how you do that is going to be going to customers, you go to actions, and you go to import. So usually it's going to start asking you for importing either a file or Google Contacts. I rarely see people use this unless you're using Google as your CRM, which is somewhat difficult to use, but I've seen some people do it. But usually you'll end up doing some sort of file. You upload the file here, and as you can see, you'll be met with this import. One thing you'll notice is that if I were to go to the same thing through Jobber as an example, if you go through here, the import process, there's going to be a simple CSV file that you can use here and begin import. The interesting part is like the backend system that does these imports are actually the same. So it looks almost, identical between Housecall Pro and Jobber. That's because a lot of backend systems for a lot of these systems are actually the same. They're just kind of built into the platform. When you do this, you're going to want to upload the file, which is that CSV. So you're going to want to pare this down and actually start mapping them. So each of these platforms has an import template that you can get. And what I usually do for my clients is that we do a process called field mapping, which is figuring out what fields do you have in the current system, what fields do you have in the destination system, and figure out which field goes to where. This is important because you need to know what data you're going to lose, what data you're going to have to manipulate, and what data you're going to ultimately have to get rid of and that you're going to lose completely. What you'll notice is that all of the fields that you can actually import from Housecall Pro are all in here. So as you can see, there's not a ton. We've narrowed down a lot of the fields that he was wanting to keep from his Zoho account, because like, even though there's a ton of fields in here, we decided that there's not a ton here that's actually providing value for him. So this is a good way to actually do what's called data cleansing, which is just to get rid of unwanted data fields that might be extraneous. But the main part here is that this is split into two different sections. One is the customer fields, which is one module of Housecall Pro. The second field are going to be the job fields, which is the second module. You have to import these separately when you're starting this process. Now, when you end up going through this entire workflow, the import process is going to ask you to actually map all of these anyways. So having something like this is going to be hugely useful to being able to actually go through this line by line based on whatever import guide that the platform shows you. Now, Housecall Pro is limited only to these. They do not have a way to do custom fields. Now, the one thing that sets Jobber apart from Housecall Pro, and this is the reason why a lot of my videos, I tend to recommend Jobber for the most part, because it's easier to be able to migrate to Jobber from a different solution. And I recommend Housecall Pro for startups, because if you use Housecall Pro as it is, it works out of the box and actually simplifies your process a little bit. So what I'll show you here is a sample CSV. So a sample client import for Jobber is an example. Very similar fields. So it's not a whole ton more. So this is going to be equivalent to the Housecall Pro mapping fields here. All basic information. If you're exporting from QuickBooks as an example, these are probably going to be in there. That being said, the thing that makes Jobber particularly useful is that when you end up going through and wanting to do something specific, like for example, you want to track marketing campaigns and certain set of clients. So you might have snow plowing in one season, landscaping in another. You might want to differentiate that. You have the ability in Jobber to actually create custom fields, whatever you want. So in this case, you make what's called structured data. So unstructured data are just free-form fields. Usually there are note fields in each of the platforms. Structured data are fields that you can filter by, that you can search by really easily, and that you can sort and report by very easily. And this becomes enormously important down the road when you're actually trying to figure out, if you have thousands of clients, which clients are you going to be sending a notification to, which clients are behind in their services, which clients have dogs in their house, whatever the case is. You're going to be able to actually sort all of those through these custom fields. And the way Jobber's set up is that it actually has more than two. So again, Housecall Pro has customers and jobs and a price book, which is something separate. In Jobber, you have client custom fields, you have property custom fields, you have quote custom fields, job custom fields, invoice, and team. So you have a lot more options to be able to actually organize your data sets. And if you plan to grow in the next, 2, 3, 5 years, having this structure actually makes it easier to migrate to like a mid-market or a higher end solution. So like something like Zuper or Service Titan, because these are fields that are going to keep that data very organized and actually useful when you're migrating to a more complex system. So that is one of the biggest considerations that I would say is between Housecall Pro and Jobber. When you decide to go into a higher end solution, you need to implement. Usually the implementations for both Zuper and Housecall Pro are usually 2 to 3 months long, if not longer for in Service Titan's case. But the reason that is that you're customizing all of these fields relative to what you want to automate. And that's the key part about all these custom fields, is that you can start creating automations based on a lot of those fields. So if, for example, you have snowplow clients and you're going to be emailing them right at the beginning of the season, you want to be able to highlight which clients are actually snowplow clients, which ones are on a maintenance contract, which ones have the maintenance contract for a specific project. You can track all of that. And with higher end solutions, so in this case, Zuper, you have much more capabilities, not just to put specific fields, but to then actually add different types of field categories, which also translates into standard operating procedures. You can make checklists with these. You can make a lot of automation. You can do calculations. So one of the big pieces that causes people to upgrade from Jobber to something like Zuper or Service Titan is detailed job costing. So you want to be able to track profitability, things like that. Obviously, that only impacts a lot of businesses once you've actually scaled a decent amount, but you can start tracking discounts, you can track labor rates, count receivables, pretty much anything that you can do. More comprehensive systems, you have the ability to actually map all of that. And as you can see here, these systems also have things like inventory management and whatnot, which then expands a lot of those capabilities onward. So I won't touch on too deep on this directly, but the final thing I'll show you is that if you do end up kind of comparing the higher end solutions, if you want something out of the box, like moving from HP or Jobber to something larger, and you probably heard of Service Titan if you are scaling, they're primarily a fit for these 6 categories. So HVAC, plumbing, electrical, garage door, chimney, and roofing. If you're not within these 6 categories, and this is something I forgot to mention in one of my review videos, you will actually be punted down to one of their sub brands, either Field Roofs, Aspire, or Convex, which are cheaper softwares, but they're more comparable to Jobber as an example. So just keep that in mind. Even if you're in these, depending on what your capabilities are, your budget, things like that, Zuper is also going to be an ideal option if you want to maintain that kind of data integrity. So hopefully, to wrap up, just to quickly emphasize what the key parts here are. If you have a fairly simple data set in your CRM and you don't plan to do any automation whatsoever, then Housecall Pro does the trick. And when I say automation, it does include like marketing automations as well, which is a key part of how a lot of these platforms use these. So you don't need any relational fields like dealing with multi-property commercial clients, or you don't need to track the data outside of the system. Then in those cases, Housecall Pro is usually just fine, even if you're not a startup business. But if you need to start tracking any of these fields that you can see here, Jobber does have the leg up that you can add those custom fields to better organize your client lists and acts as a better CRM in this case. But if you are in a much more data intensive environment, if you need a lot more tracking and you think that a lot more automation can do a decent amount of impact to your business, and you're doing a ton of manual processes already, that's when you need to start looking at something like Zuper, where it's definitely like a cost increase, but the amount of time and money that you'll save in the long run can be quite effective if you're able to automate a lot of those custom processes. So ultimately, I think Jobber is usually a great fit if you're under 10 employees and under 7 figures in revenue. I don't see very many businesses, unless you do really high-end projects, needing anything beyond Jobber or Housecall Pro. Once you hit that mark, that's usually when it makes sense to start looking at Service Titan and Zuper. So that's it. If you have any questions, again, we do free 15-minute consultations for anything technology or marketing related. Otherwise, check out our other videos. They're going to be somewhere on my channel, so feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And hopefully that helped you out. And this is Joe signing out. I'll see you all in the next one.